Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so it's Halacha and Tanya. I hope everybody had a great Lag BaOmer. Okay, anyway, we're learning in Muktzeh. The last thing we're in the middle of, which is called Muktzeh Machmas Atzmei, is just like things that are not edible, things that are not like we've discussed, raw meat, raw fish. Foods that are raw, that are not edible. So because they're not edible, they're not called food. If they're not food, it's muktzeh. And Yom Tif, when you're allowed to cook, so then you would be allowed to, it wouldn't be muktzeh because Yom Tif, you could take the raw food and cook it. So the last thing we were talking about, and we said, therefore, you have to be careful. If you have a freezer and you have raw meat or raw fish in the freezer in the front, or chicken, and you want to get to something in the back of it, you're going to have a problem getting to it because you can't move the stuff out of the way in a normal way because they're muktzeh. Okay, the last thing we were discussing really was medications. We're discussing, bottom line is certain medications, medicines, you're not allowed to take on Shabbos. Today, they're more lenient about it, but bottom line is if it's a medicine you can't take on Shabbos, it's muktzeh. If it's a medication you could take on Shabbos, then it's not muktzeh. Okay, that's where we're up to now. By the way, it's interesting. If you have a medicine bottle that was emptied on Shabbos of medicine, which is muktzeh, so then the container becomes muktzeh or remains muktzeh because it was muktzeh when Shabbos began because it had the muktzeh medication in it. Okay. Roach killers, those things that kill bugs are because you're not allowed to kill bugs on Shabbos, it's muktzeh. Some poskim want to say it's keli shemalachta le'isr. Some people are more strict that it's completely muktzeh. Animal poisons are muktzeh. We're going to learn soon, but while we're on this topic, animals, generally speaking, again, we're going to get into it very shortly, but animals are muktzeh. Dead animals are definitely muktzeh. So if you find, let's say, a dead bug on the floor, it's technically muktzeh. You cannot pick it up and throw it out. You can kick it off to the side, you can move it off to the side, but it's muktzeh because it's a dead bug. Live animals are also muktzeh. So let's say somebody has a mouse trap. Okay, they have a problem with mice, they put out a mouse trap, they catch a mouse on Shabbos, that mouse trap is completely muktzeh on Shabbos. In addition to the fact you're not allowed to put out a mouse trap on Shabbos because then you're trapping on Shabbos. But let's say the mouse trap was put out before Shabbos. And on Shabbos, you were lucky to catch a mouse in it. So that mouse is completely muktzeh. You have to leave it until after Shabbos. Now, insect repellents that don't kill bugs, they just keep bugs away from you. So those are not muktzeh on Shabbos because those you're allowed to put on. Not if it's a cream. But let's say you have an insect repellent, mosquito repellents that are a spray. Over there, those things you're allowed to put on Shabbos. So they're definitely not muktzeh. But things to kill bugs, that is completely muktzeh also. There's also a din that cosmetics, which are not allowed to be put on Shabbos, because they're not allowed to be put on Shabbos, they're completely muktzeh. Again, some poskim hold it's completely muktzeh, you can't move it for any reason. Other poskim hold that it's keli shemalachta le'isr, you can move it if you need the place or you want to do something permissible with it. It's best in halacha to be machmer, not to move it at all. Now, let me explain the concept of cosmetics to understand why your cosmetics muktzeh on Shabbos. On Shabbos, there's a number of, there's 39 major prohibitions. For instance, you cannot smoothen out a hard surface. For instance, if you have chapstick, okay, you put on chapstick, you're actually smoothing out the material. If you have stick deodorant, that is not allowed to be put out on Shabbos. Why can't you put it on Shabbos? Because you are smoothing and smearing that stick deodorant. That's why you're not allowed to use the bar of soap on Shabbos. All these things are forbidden to use on Shabbos. Anything that you smear, for instance, creams, you're not allowed to put, you can sometimes dab on cream, but you can't smear cream because you're smearing. Therefore, those creams that you're not allowed to put on Shabbos are completely muktzeh. Stick deodorants, lipstick, if it's a regular lipstick, stick of lipstick, you're not allowed to put it on Shabbos. You're not allowed to, anything that has coloring, that makes coloring, for instance. According to halacha, if somebody puts on lipstick with a lipstick on Shabbos, they're transgressing two prohibitions on Shabbos. One is smearing. It's called the malacha memachik, and also tseveya, coloring. Okay, they're coloring their lips. Even though it's not a permanent coloring, but nevertheless, it's definitely forbidden. Rabbinically, it's still forbidden, even if it's not permanent. And sometimes the question is, what is called permanent? How long is considered permanent? So therefore, for instance, to use lipstick on Shabbos is two prohibitions. Number one, you're coloring, and number one, you're smearing. So therefore, because you're not allowed to put on lipstick on Shabbos, it's completely muktzeh. If somebody has liquid lipstick, okay, it's still forbidden to put on Shabbos because it's coloring. We learned before, toothpaste, you're smearing, you're not allowed to smear on Shabbos, it becomes completely muktzeh. All these things, cosmetics, that you're not allowed to put on Shabbos, either because of smearing or because it's coloring, that is forbidden to put on Shabbos. So if it's forbidden to put on Shabbos, then it becomes completely muktzeh. So therefore, chapstick, all those things are completely muktzeh on Shabbos. Okay, let's go a little bit to very briefly to animals on Shabbos. It doesn't apply in many places, but in many places it applies very much. People own, in the time of the Gemara, people had farms. They had animals on the farms. Today, people have pets. They have dogs, they have cats, they have birds. Okay. All animals, living animals, insects, live fish, are basically animals are considered halachically, don't tell this to the animal rights, they're considered functionless on Shabbos, and therefore they're completely muktzeh. There are certain times, and it's not so simple, where you're allowed to, an animal that's in pain, you're allowed to ease the pain of the animal. To give you an example, if somebody owns a cow, and this was very relevant in the time of the Gemara, and even later, people own the cow. Now, if a cow is not milked, it gets into terrible pain. So therefore, halachically, you would be allowed to milk a cow on Shabbos to alleviate the pain of the cow, but you're not allowed to drink the milk because the milk is not good. You're not allowed to extract milk on Shabbos. It's the malacha of dash. You're extracting a liquid. It's like squeezing a lemon. So therefore, the only reason why, in most cases, you can milk a cow on Shabbos or any other animal that has milk because the animal's in pain, but then you're not allowed to use the milk on Shabbos. You have to spill it out, in fact. So, but generally speaking, animals are muktzeh. Now, when we say animals are muktzeh, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, by the way, again, it doesn't mean touching. We learned muktzeh means actually moving. So if you have a dog or a cat, you are not allowed to pick up that animal on Shabbos. If the animal comes on, if it jumps on your lap, let's say, you can pet it, because again, petting is not moving it, you're just touching it. But you cannot pick up a bird, a cat, a dog, or any other, many times people that have birds that they didn't clip the wings, so they fly around, they come on your hand. So if they're on your shoulder, let's say the bird flies onto your shoulder, you're allowed to walk around with it in the house because it's not the normal way of carrying things. But if the bird comes on your finger, you can't move with it on Shabbos. You have to shoo it off because an animal is muktzeh on Shabbos. Pets are muktzeh on Shabbos. Therefore, there's a whole, I'm not getting into it now about how do you walk a dog on Shabbos in the street. That's a whole separate halacha about, because then you have a shaila of carrying also. So that's a whole separate issue we'll leave for a different time. 1 minute. So not only that, so bird cages are muktzeh, fish tanks are muktzeh. If you have a goldfish tank, but that had goldfish on it when Shabbos began, that tank is muktzeh, completely muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason. Now they have these dog baskets and cat beds. All those things are considered completely muktzeh. Okay, I don't want to elaborate more on this because it's not that common, and if people have issues with it, they can call their local Orthodox rabbi. Okay, next type of muktzeh, which is all, by the way, under the same category of completely muktzeh, things that are prohibited. Things that are prohibited to benefit from on Shabbos. Okay? Now, for instance, to give you an example, by the way, it's a very big problem today, forgetting even Shabbos. People today, a lot of Israeli products, a lot of Israeli fruits are sold in America. You have Israeli Jaffa oranges. You have a lot of people are importing now from Israel a lot of fruits. So I'm not discussing, you have an issue with that because you need to separate truma and meiser from it before you eat it. Then you have another problem of shmita. If it grew in the sabbatical year, you're not allowed to eat it. So people ideally in America should not buy Israeli produce unless if it has a super hechsher that said it was taken care of, trumas, meiser, everything else. Otherwise, you wouldn't be allowed to use it. Now, not only that, even if you would separate truma and meiser from it, let's say you know how to do it, you still can't do it on Shabbos. And we'll learn it. I'm going to mention the same din right now. We'll understand it, how it works with the fruits and vegetables from Israel. When you bake bread or cookies or cakes with a certain amount of flour, we know you have to separate challah. It's one of the 3 mitzvahs belonging to the women. You have a mitzvah of separating challah. You make a bracha. It's a whole process. Now, what happens if somebody forgot to separate challah from the dough? Okay. In fact, last week before Shabbos, I had 2 questions like this. They bake challah, it's already baked. Normally you separate the challah, when it's dough, and then you wrap it up and you burn it in the oven. But these people baked the challah already, and they forgot to separate challah, and the challah is already baked. So then what do you do if it's still before Shabbos? So before Shabbos, you put all the challahs together in a tray. You cover it with a towel to unite all the dough, so to speak. And then you separate challah. You separate challah from the baked bread or baked from the baked challah or whatever. You make a bracha and you separate challah. Then the challahs are going to be able to be eaten. Now, obviously, when you separate challah, you're going to be ruining one complete challah because you're taking off a piece from the complete challah. So it's not going to be a complete challah for lechem mishnah, but you have no choice. What happens if somebody forgot to separate challah and they reminded themselves Friday night after Shabbos began? They reminded themselves Friday night that they forgot to separate challah from the challah that they baked. So here, there's a fundamental difference between Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. The din is in Eretz Yisrael, you are stuck. You cannot eat the challah on Shabbos. Why can you not eat the challah on Shabbos? Because before you separate challah, you're not allowed to eat the bread. You have to separate challah first. So now Shabbos began. This is food that's not edible. It's not usable. Now you're going to be separating challah from it. You are making what's called makeh b'patish. You are fixing something which is broken. You're putting the finishing touches on something, making it usable. Now, if you separate challah, you can eat you can eat all the challah. So then on Shabbos, you'd be fixing the challah. So therefore, the din is, if somebody forgot to separate challah in Israel before Shabbos began, those challahs are not allowed to be eaten on Shabbos. After Shabbos, you separate challah and you can eat them. Now, therefore, these challahs are completely muktzeh. They're not usable for anything. So they are completely muktzeh. Why? It's forbidden food. Forbidden food is muktzeh. Now, outside of Eretz Yisrael, because challah outside of Eretz Yisrael is more rabbinic, so therefore there's a solution that you're allowed to do. And that is, this you can even do during the weekday. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, where the mitzvah of challah is not as strong, so to speak, what you do is you're allowed to eat the whole challah and leave over a piece at the end. In Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to eat any of it until you separate. But outside of Eretz Yisrael, the din is you're allowed to eat the challah and just leave over a piece at the end for challah that you're going to burn. So therefore, if somebody outside of Eretz Yisrael, somebody in California, forgot to separate challah, and now they came Friday night, they have their challahs, but they forgot to separate challah. What do? So outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's not a problem. You're allowed to eat the challah. You just leave over a piece at the end. But then you're not fixing anything. You're leaving over a piece at the end that's designated for challah. So then that's not an issue. But in Eretz Yisrael, for instance, it would be completely muktzeh, because you're not allowed to eat it. It's completely muktzeh. Now, Yom Tiv, though, it wouldn't be muktzeh, because Yom Tiv you're allowed to bake challah. If Yom Tiv you're allowed to bake challah, then you can separate the challah. So the challah is not muktzeh and Shabbos and Yom Tiv. I'll give you another example. Just a few weeks ago, we had Pesach. Chametz on Pesach is not allowed to be eaten. Not only is it not allowed to be eaten, it's not allowed to be benefiting. You can't benefit from chametz on Pesach. Therefore, chametz on Pesach is completely muktzeh. You can't move it at all. So what happens if somebody found challah, chametz on Pesach and Yom Tiv? So you're not allowed to pick it up and throw it out. What do you have to do? It says in halacha, you take a plate or a shmata or a rat and you cover it. You're not allowed to pick it up. It's muktzeh. You can't even pick it up to throw out. You can't even pick it up if you sold your chametz to put it back with the rest of the chametz, because it's muktzeh. It's not edible, and you can benefit from it. For instance, another thing, mixtures of meat and milk. If somebody has a mixture of meat and milk together. Now, meat and milk is not only forbidden to eat, it's forbidden also, you cannot derive benefit from it. And just to recap, the Torah says 3 times, do not cook a goat in its mother's milk, right? Do not cook a goat in its mother's milk. Torah says it 3 times. Why does it say it 3 times? The Gemara says, one to teach us just cooking it is biblically forbidden. One is to tell us you're not allowed to eat it. And one is to tell us you can't even benefit from it. So if somebody has meat and milk in a product, that meat and milk is asur bahana, and therefore it's muktzeh on Shabbos. And we mentioned when we're learning the laws of kashrus, I'm pretty sure we mentioned that if you have a dog or a cat and you serve them dog food or cat food, you have to check the ingredients, even though dogs don't need to eat Chabad shchita. But they're not allowed to eat meat and milk because you're benefiting from it. You're feeding your dog. So therefore, for instance, if you have dog food or cat food, whatever, that has in the ingredients beef and milk derivatives, you're not allowed to feed that to your dog. If it's pork and milk, then you could feed it to your dog. If it's chicken and milk, you're allowed to feed it to your dog. Why? Biblically, meat and milk is only forbidden if it's a kosher animal with a mother that has milk. Like chicken is only rabbinically forbidden because there's no mother's milk. It says do not cook a goat in its mother's milk. So the Gemara learns out that chicken is only rabbinically forbidden. The rabbis forbade it. But regular beef and milk of a kosher animal, even though it's not shechted, it's asur bano, you can't benefit from it. So let's say you have something chazer, pork, a pig in it, whatever. Because it's already forbidden, what's called enes or chalalis, which I'm not getting into now. So that though you could benefit from, that you would be allowed to feed your dog or your cat. But if it's beef, meaning a kosher animal's meat, even though it wasn't shechted, and it has milk in the ingredients or milk derivatives, you cannot feed it to your dog. You can benefit from it. If you can benefit from it, it's muktzeh. So even though dog food, let's say animal food is not muktzeh because it's edible for dogs, but if it's meat and milk together, you're not allowed to feed it to your dogs, and therefore it would be completely muktzeh. But for instance, somebody asked a question about shrimp. Yeah, shrimp you're allowed to benefit from. Or for instance, what happens if somebody wants to give their dog non-kosher meat, even if it's pig's meat, let's say. Pig's meat itself, you're not allowed to eat, but you could benefit from a pig. So therefore, let's say if somebody wants to give his dog pork, halachically you can give it to them. And because you can give it to them, it wouldn't be muktzeh on Shabbos. But if it would be holy Hasidic shechita with milk, it's completely muktzeh on Shabbos. And you can't give it to your animal to eat. Okay, there's chametz and Pesach, meat and milk. Now, for instance, there's what's called yayin nesach. Yayin nesach means wine that was poured for idolatry. Okay, that's biblically forbidden to drink, to benefit from Tavei Zarah, it's idol worship. Then the Chachamim came along and said there's something called stam yainam. Stam yainam means wine that was not poured for idol worshiping, but it's uncooked wine that a non-Jew touched. That the non-Jew touched after the bottle was opened. So that the Chachamim say you're allowed to drink, and in most times you can't even benefit from it. So if you have wine, let's say, that's not mevushal, it's not cooked wine, and your housekeeper touched the wine by mistake, she was cleaning the fridge and she touched the bottle of wine, or she was cleaning your bar and she touched the wine that's not mevushal and it was open, that thing becomes completely muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason whatsoever. Now, other unkosher food, okay, because you could benefit from it, it's not muktzeh. But things that are forbidden to eat, and you cannot benefit from it in any way whatsoever, or it's designated only to eat and for nothing else, then it would be completely Muktzeh on Shabbos. For instance, I'll give you a bunch of other examples. And this applies in California because a lot of people have fruit trees. It's biblically forbidden to rip a fruit off a tree on Shabbos because it's kaitzer, it's called, you're harvesting. Therefore, the Chachamim came along and said that if a fruit falls off the tree by itself, like you're walking in your backyard and all of a sudden you see that an apple, a fig, a date, whatever, fell onto the ground, you're not allowed to eat it on Shabbos. Why are you not allowed to eat it on Shabbos? Because the Chachamim are afraid if you're allowed to eat it on Shabbos, you come to pick the fruit off the tree. Therefore, there's, by the way, just in passing, it's an interesting din. If you, we know an esrog has a good smell. If you walk by an esrog tree on Shabbos, you're not allowed to smell the fruit. If you walk by a tree that has a fruit, edible fruit, you are not allowed to smell it on Shabbos. Why? Chacham said you're going to smell it, you're going to forget the Shabbos and you're going to pull it off. But what happens if it's not edible bush, like jasmine? Okay, jasmine has a beautiful smell. That you are allowed to smell on Shabbos. Why? Because the only thing you do with it is smell it. If the only thing you do with it is smelling it, so you can smell it while it's still connected to the tree. You don't have the bush. You don't have to pull it off. So that's the concept of these things that are muktzeh. For instance, clothes that are shatnez, wool and linen together, according to most poskim, it's muktzeh. Some people say if you would cover something with it, it will not be muktzeh, but Alter Rebbe says shatnez is muktzeh on Shabbos. Why? Because you're not allowed to wear it. So it's not a garment. If it's not a garment, then it's muktzeh. Okay.
Can't have any benefit from shatnez.
You could have benefit from shatnez, but the fact is this garment is not made, it's an expensive garment. You're not going to cover garbage with it or anything else. So therefore it's only made to wear, and you're not going to wear it because you're not allowed to. So then it would be muktzeh. Or you have like eggs laid on Shabbos. If somebody has chickens and the chickens laid eggs on Shabbos, those eggs are muktzeh for the duration of Shabbos. Therefore, you're not allowed to eat the eggs on Shabbos. So therefore, they're muktzeh. Milk from a cow, like we said before, that was milked on Shabbos, is muktzeh because you're not allowed to use the milk. So any of those things, type of things like this, is now. Well, one last thing, and then we'll go to Tanya. No, you have to spell it out. Okay, what happens if somebody has a brand new utensil, a pot, that they didn't immerse in the mikveh? Now, we learned already, you're not allowed to immerse new kalim in a mikveh on Shabbos. Let's say there's an area you're carrying, whatever, you can immerse a keli in a mikveh on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. Why? The utensil is not usable as is. Now you're making it usable. Okay? But a new vessel, a new pot, is not muktzeh. Or let's say a new dish. Why isn't it muktzeh? Because I can use it to put other things on it. I don't have to put food on it. In order to use a pot or a dish or a glass or whatever, for food, you need to table it. But if I'm not interested in using it for food, then I don't have to table it. So it's usable. If it's usable and it's usable as is, then it wouldn't be considered muktzeh. Because again, it's usable as is. I can't eat from them, but it's usable as is. Okay, we're going to go to Tanya now.
Just one question about the dog. If I pet the dog, won't the fur come off?
If you pet a dog and fur will come off, you're not allowed to pet the dog. If you just touch the dog and no fur comes off, or no hair, comes whatever, then it's not a problem.